This is The Millionaire Next Door, Chapter 2, Part 2, pages 51 through 58. But what does the popular press tell us? The press sensationalizes that very small proportion of Americans who purchase expensive shoes and related artifacts. Consider this news story about a boxing promoter, Don King, who spent 2 hours shopping for shoes in Atlanta. During that time, Mr. King purchased 10 pairs of shoes from one store, 110 pairs of shoes from one store, for which he paid $64,100, tax included. His purchase topped the previous sales record for the store, held by Magic Johnson, who spent $35,000 during one visit. Mr. King's record purchase translates into an average of $582.73 per pair. How much did Mr. King pay for his most expensive pair? It was reported that a pair of alligator loafers cost him $850. Note that only 1% of millionaires in our survey paid $667 or more for a pair of shoes. Nonetheless, the popular media enjoy touting abnormalities in buying behavior. As a consequence, our youth are told that buying expensive items is normal behavior for affluent people. They are led to believe that the wealthy have a high consumption lifestyle. They learn that hyperspending is the main reward for becoming affluent in America. Why does Johnny Lucas get ignored while Mr. King receives headlines? Because Johnny's consumption habits are mundane. His rewards are more intangible than the product related. Financial independence, discipline, and being an excellent family provider, a fine husband, and a father of well-disciplined children. The last chance for Mr. Lucas. Is there any life remaining for our proposed TV program about America's typical millionaire? Can Johnny Lucas still rally and bring back the audience he lost? Johnny Lucas, the affluent business owner, is very punctual. He is never late for his meetings. He arrives at work each weekday at 6:30 a.m. How does he do this? It must be his wristwatch. Could it be that Johnny wears an expensive watch? By now, you have probably guessed the answer, and once again, the audience is disappointed. Fully one half of the millionaires surveyed never in their lives spent more than $235 for a wristwatch. About 1 in 10 never paid more than $47, while 1 in 4 spent $100 or less. Certainly millionaires purchase expensive watches, but they are in the minority, even among millionaires. Only 25% of those surveyed paid $1,125 or more. About 1 in 10 paid $3,800 or more. About 1 in 100 paid $15,000 or more. Johnny would, we are sure, apologize to the TV audience for his mundane taste in clothing and jewelry, but we are sure that he would also define his position by reporting the following. I live in a fine home, but have no mortgage. All my children's college accounts were more than fully funded before they even began attending college. Unfortunately, Johnny's story, including his apology, will never get into syndication. So rare, the Johnny Lucases. Why are so many people in America affluent? Even most households with a six-figure annual incomes are not affluent. These people have different orientation than Johnny Lucas. They believe in spending tomorrow's cash today. They are debt-prone and are on earn and consume treadmills. To many of them, those who do not display abundant material possessions are not successful. To them, non-display oriented people like Johnny Lucas are their inferiors. Johnny Lucas is not likely to be held in high regard by many of his neighbors. On a social status scale, he is below average. But on what criteria? In his neighbors' eyes, Johnny has low occupational status. He is an owner of a small business. What happens when he occasionally comes home in one of his janitorial vans? The van stays in the driveway until he leaves the next morning. What are his neighbors to think? They do not know that Johnny is financially independent. They do not give him points for being married and never divorced, fully funding his children's college tuition, employing several dozen people, having integrity, being frugal, paying off his mortgage, and so forth. No, many of his neighbors would prefer that Johnny move out of the neighborhood. Why? Perhaps it's because he and his family don't look affluent, dress like the affluent, drive the vehicles of the affluent, or work in high status positions. Playing great defense. The affluent tend to answer yes to three questions we include in our surveys. Were your parents very frugal? Are you frugal? Is your spouse more frugal than you are? This last question is highly significant. Not only are the most prodigious accumulators of wealth frugal, their spouses tend to be even more frugal. Consider the typical affluent household. Nearly 95% of millionaire households are composed of married couples. In 70% of the households, the male contributes at least 80% of the income. Most of these men play great offense in the game called income generation. Great offense in economic terms means that the household generates an income significantly higher than the norm, which in America is an annual realized income of approximately $33,000. Most of these households also play great defense, that is, they are frugal when it comes to spending for consumer goods and services. One frugal high-income producer within the married couple category, however, does not automatically translate into a high level of net worth. Sometimes, or something else must be present. A self-made millionaire stated it best when he told us, "I can't get my wife to spend any money." Most people will never become wealthy in one generation if they are married to people who are wasteful. A couple cannot accumulate wealth if one of its members is a hyper-consumer. This is especially true when one or both are trying to build a successful business. Few people can sustain profligate spending habits and simultaneously build wealth. Ode to his frugal family. How did the wife of a millionaire respond when her husband gave her $8 million worth of stock in the company he recently took public? According to her husband of 31 years, she said, "I appreciate this. I really do." Then she smiled, never changing her position at the kitchen table, where she continued to cut out 20, 25, and 50-cent off food coupons from the week's supply of newspapers. Nothing is so important as to interrupt her Sunday morning chores. She just does today like she always has done, even when all we owned was a kitchen table. It's how come we're well off today. Made a lot of trade-offs, sacrifices early in our marriage. Why aren't you wealthy, you asked? Well, let's examine your lifestyle. Is it one of great offense? Are you in the 70,000, 100,000, 200,000 income category? Congratulations. You play wonderful offense. But how is it that you keep losing the game called wealth accumulation? Be honest with yourself. Could it be that you play terrible defense? Most high income earners are in the same situation, but not most millionaires. Not most millionaires. Millionaires play both quality offense and quality defense, and quite often their great defense helps them outscore and / out accumulate those who out earn have superior offenses. The foundation stone of wealth accumulation is defense, and this defense should be anchored by budgeting and planning. We have discovered that several occupational groups contain large numbers of budgeters and planners. Affluent auctioneers. Our latest survey of auctioneers found more than 35% of them are millionaires. This percentage is slightly higher than the proportion of millionaire households living in America's finest urban and suburban neighborhoods. Auctioneers have been our list of highly productive types since we conducted our first study of occupations in 1983, when they ranked sixth among those with realized incomes of more than $100,000. But their income alone was not what caught our attention. Given the same level of income, who accumulates more wealth? An auctioneer residing in small town America, or someone who lives in high status urban suburban neighborhood? As you can guess, it is the typical auctioneer. Auctioneers are more frugal than their high income producing counterparts in prestige areas. They have lower overhead, both household both for household and business expenditures. To some extent, these data are explained by the lower cost of living and doing business in small towns. Yet, even when cost of living is taken into account, auctioneers are more prone to accumulate wealth. Consider the following: on average, millionaire auctioneers are about 50 years of age, 6 to 8 years younger than their urban or suburban counterparts. The average millionaire auctioneer spends only 61% of the amount suburban or urban millionaires allocate for housing. Urban/suburban millionaires are more than 3 times more likely than millionaire auctioneers to own luxury foreign automobiles. Auctioneers hold a higher proportion of their wealth in appreciating assets than do other high-income producers, and they invest in categories in which they have enterprise. Auctioneers have experience with bankruptcy. They are aware that consumer goods often generate few cents on the dollar. One auctioneer explained why she was so frugal. When I was quite young, I watched a woman crying, sitting on a chair in her front yard. All the while, bidders were walking away with everything she once owned. I'll never forget that woman. Let's ask the typical American self-made millionaire about her defense. We will refer to her as Mrs. Jane Rule. Mrs. Rule and her husband own a small business, an auctioneering/appraising company. They also invest in several of the categories of the items they appraise. Mr. Rule is the visible manager of the business. He gets much of the credit for its success. After all, he speaks very well and very quickly, but it's actually Mrs. Rule who is the true force, the real leader of this enterprise. It's her planning, designing, budgeting, bill collecting, and marketing that made this auctioneering company successful. Why are Mr. and Mrs. Rule millionaires today? Because Mrs. Rule plays tremendous defense. She is responsible for budgeting and spending for both her household and their business. Is anyone in your household responsible for budgeting? All too often, the answer is not really. All too often, people allow their income to define their budgets. When we tell our audiences about the budgeting and planning habits of the affluent, someone always asks a predictable question. Why would someone who is a millionaire need to budget? Our answer is always the same. They became millionaires by budgeting and controlling expenses, and they maintain their affluent status the same way. Sometimes we are forced to add analogies to make our point. We ask, for example, have you ever noticed those people whom you see jogging day after day? They are the ones who seem not need to jog, but that's why they are fit. Those who are wealthy work at staying financially fit, but those who are not financially fit do little to change their status. Most people want to be physically fit, and the majority know what is required to achieve this. But despite that knowledge, most people never become well-conditioned physically. Why not? Because they don't have the discipline to just do it. They don't budget their time just to do it. It's like becoming wealthy in America. Oh, you want to, all right, but you play lousy financial defense. You don't have the discipline to control your spending. You don't take the time to budget or plan. Note that under-accumulators of wealth spend 3 times as much exercising per month as they do planning their investment strategies. Mrs. Rule is different. She's like most millionaires. She's disciplined. She takes time to plan and budget. This translates into wealth. Mrs. Rule's household income varies from year to year. It is typical for auctioneers to have ups and downs in their cash flow. Often downturns in our nation's economy translate into increased demand for auctioneering services. Over the past 5 years, her annual income averaged around $90,000, but her net worth keeps increasing. Today, Mrs. Rule has a net worth of more than $2 million. In our survey, she answered yes to 4 questions about planning and budgeting. Do you wish to become affluent and stay affluent? Can you answer yes, candidly and honestly to 4 simple questions? Question 1. Does your household operate on an annual budget? Do you plan your consumption spending according to a variety of food, clothing, and shelter categories each year? Mrs. Rule does, and so do most millionaires. In fact, in our latest National Survey of Millionaires, we found that for every 100 millionaires who don't budget, there are about 120 who do. We anticipate your questions about those millionaires who don't Budget. How did they become millionaires? How did they control their spending? They create an artificial economic environment of scarcity for themselves and the other members of their household. More than half of the non budgeters invest first and spend the balance of their income. Many call this the pay yourself first strategy. These people invest a minimum of 15% of their annual realized income before they pay the sellers of their food, clothes, homes, credit, and the like. Whether, what about those millionaires who don't budget or create an environment of relative scarcity? Some inherit all or most of their wealth. Another minority, accounting for fewer than 20% of millionaires, typically earn such high incomes that to some extent they can eat their income and still have a seven-figure net worth. In other words, their extraordinary good offense compensates for a lack of defense. But so what if you earn $2 million a year and have a net worth of $1 million?